Welcome to the Colleague Experience podcast. In today's episode, we're diving into bold insights, experimentation, and groundbreaking leadership strategies that challenge the status quo. We'll explore how unresolved childhood experiences can shape leadership styles, using the story of Moses as a powerful example of how personal history influences professional impact. Get ready for an enlightening journey into understanding informal roles and making conscious choices in leadership. Let's dive in. We can say with considerable confidence that the uncontested hero of 4 out of 5 books of the Torah is Moses, or by his full name, Moses, our teacher. Moses' personal character as a human being is fascinating, and it integrates distinctly with his leadership, which invites us to think about role analysis. Role analysis is a technique we love to use both in our colleague group sessions and in individual or group work with managers and leadership teams. The idea behind this technique is to try to understand what our informal role is. The informal role is our life mission. As its name suggests, it's informal, meaning it's not something someone defined for us, and it's also not something we defined for ourselves. More than that, we're usually completely unaware of this role, but it has a dramatic influence on how we conduct ourselves in the world, generally, and in our professional framework particularly. Our informal role develops from our earliest childhood stages, from our first organization, which is our family of origin, and it accompanies us in every human social situation, and of course in management and leadership roles. A very familiar psychological phenomenon is the attempt to recreate painful wounds from childhood. When we have an unresolved issue from our childhood that we haven't processed, we'll try to recreate it again and again in our adult lives, driven by the fantasy that this time we'll fix the story, and it will end differently. This, of course, doesn't happen. So the recreation only deepens the pain and creates a frustrating pattern of repeating past crises. The metaphor we like to use to describe this phenomenon is that star we see in the sky, even though it no longer exists in reality. Because of the great distance from the star, the light that left it many, many years ago reaches us now, but while the light was traveling, the star stopped existing, and what we see is a kind of illusion. In role analysis processes, childhood stories emerge that testify to something that happened in our distant childhood, and despite the fact that it no longer exists for many years, it still illuminates and colors our adult lives through our informal role that activates us again and again. The goal of the process is to create the possibility of a different choice for us. A choice that doesn't continue our automatic patterns, but allows us to choose a different pattern. Let us share 2 brief examples from our consulting work that illustrate this dynamic. We worked with a media agency director who consistently found himself taking on impossible client deadlines and burning out his team. Through role analysis, we discovered his informal role as the family rescuer stemmed from childhood experiences where he felt responsible for preventing his parents' arguments. He was unconsciously recreating this dynamic at work, trying to rescue every difficult client situation. Once he became aware of this pattern, he learned to set boundaries and delegate more effectively. Similarly, we worked with an infrastructure project manager who struggled with delegation and insisted on personally checking every detail. Her informal role as the guardian traced back to being the eldest child who had to protect her siblings when their father left. In her professional life, she was unconsciously trying to protect her projects and team from any possible failure, which paradoxically created bottlenecks and team frustration. We won't elaborate now on the role analysis technique itself. We'll just say that it's very simple and always works, in the sense of how simple yet wise it is. Let's return to Moses. Moses isn't with us to tell us about his childhood and the leadership dilemmas he faces, but the scripture provides us with abundant information so we can raise hypotheses about the personal motives that shaped his leadership. The special story of Moses' childhood allows us a glimpse into an experience that largely shaped his adult life. Abandonment. His mother was forced to abandon him. Twice. The first time when she was forced to place him in a basket in the river. The second time, when he was weaned from nursing after Pharaoh's daughter, who found him in the river, asked her to nurse him for her. Later in his life, he grew up as a stranger in Pharaoh's house, a Hebrew among Egyptians. It seems this experience shaped Moses' personality and made him a person who naturally doesn't rush to feel closeness to people and has difficulty developing trust and intimacy with those around him. He's a relatively introverted person, someone who speaks little and focuses mainly on actions. How do we know this? Moses testifies about himself. "I am not a man of words, neither yesterday nor the day before. For I am heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue." In addition, the first story the scripture tells us about adult Moses is about how he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he rises up and kills him. He doesn't speak, but acts. This is an important point. We'll return to it later. Later, Moses leads Israel out of Egypt into the desert on their journey to the land of Canaan. Beyond the technical need to lead the people in the desert, Moses' central mission is to create the connection between Israel and God. To build trust between the sides. Moses fails in this mission, time after time. Despite everything God does for them, the children of Israel continue to complain about their situation. Again and again, they refuse to believe that God will indeed lead them safely to the promised land. And they ask to return to Egypt. One of the reasons for this is Moses himself, whose introverted personality and difficulty communicating and creating empathy doesn't allow trust relationships to develop. The language the scripture chooses to use to describe the relationship between Moses and Israel throughout the years of wandering in the desert is very harsh and characterized by quarrels, anger, disappointment, and despair. We don't find in it an example of empathy and love being revealed in Moses' relationships with Israel, or at all. In parentheses, we should say that even in Moses' adult life, he experiences abandonment. His wife and 2 children disappear from his life at an early stage of the story. And in the end, God also abandons him on the mountain before entering the land. We'll return to this shortly. Close parentheses. One of the familiar stories about Moses is bringing water out of the rock. Here's a summary of the events. The children of Israel arrive at the wilderness of Zin, and there's no water. Big surprise. It's a desert. Why should there be water in it? They complain and quarrel with Moses. Again. Moses and Aaron are forced to flee to the tent from the crowd. God comes down and instructs Moses to speak to the rock to bring out water. Moses strikes the rock twice, and water pours out like champagne. Everyone is satisfied. Everyone? Well, not quite, almost everyone. Except for God. He's angry at Moses for striking the rock and not speaking to it as requested. Remember what was the first thing Moses says to God. "I am not a man of words," as we said, a gun that was placed in the first act. Moses can't manage to speak even to a rock. He prefers to strike it. This worked with the Egyptian when he needed to defend the lives of his Hebrew brothers. It doesn't work when you need to build trust and connection. Following this incident, Moses doesn't merit entering the land. He's abandoned once more, this time by God. After leading Israel for decades from slavery to freedom, he dies alone and disappointed, and his burial place is unknown. Moses, one of the greatest leaders who arose for Israel, succeeded in bringing them out of Egypt and leading them for 40 years in the desert, but failed in the mission of building the connection between Israel and God, a connection that would contain trust and faith. In this sense, Moses received a mission that to succeed in it, he would have needed to break out of the most basic patterns and perceptions of his soul. Moses' leadership is, of course, more complex than the framework we've narrowed it down to in our text. What can we do? These are the limitations of the format. But if we focus on what we've brought, we can say that part of our development as leaders and leadership needs to be awareness of our informal roles, of the non-existent stars we still see, and knowing how to create choices for ourselves in places where we operate on automatic. We'll end with a verse from Canaan, the brilliant song by Shlomi Shaban, which describes a conversation between M, Moses, J, Joshua, and C, Caleb son of Jephunneh. All that J basically says is that a great leader needs to know how to give up, to step back in order to be remembered as what all his life he would want to forget. And that wraps up today's podcast. We explored how Moses' early experiences shaped his leadership challenges and the importance of understanding one's informal roles for effective leadership. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends and colleagues so they can also stay updated on the latest news and gain powerful insights. Stay tuned for more updates.